All right, I am pleased now to welcome back and introduce my colleague Luke Tilley as this morning's keynote speaker. Luke is the chief economist for M&T Bank and its investment arm, Wilmington Trust Investment Advisors, Inc. Prior to joining Wilmington in 2015, he was an officer and economic advisor with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Earlier in his career, he worked as a senior economist at IHS Global Insight and as an economist for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He holds a PhD in economics from Temple University and a bachelor's degree in economics and history from James Madison University. He is the current chair of the American Bankers Association Economic Advisory Committee, a former president of the Philadelphia Council for Business Economics, and a former faculty member at Temple. He joins us today to share Wilmington Trust 2026 capital markets forecast, which will dive into some of the what we call economic experiments occurring today. So whether you've attended this event before or are here for the first time, I am confident you will take away valuable insights from Luke's analysis and perspectives on the drivers of economic performance on the national level and how they may impact you and your businesses. Please join me in welcoming Luke Tilley.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, CenterState CEO, and thank all of you for coming back. This is, I think, third year in a row that I have done this, and I absolutely love coming and doing this event to talk to you about how M&T and Wilmington Trust see the economy, what we think lies ahead in the year ahead in 2026, and also I like to hear from businesses on how they are experiencing the economy. I was especially excited last night because I received a copy of the economic forecast, and a lot of the items, well, basically all the items that I'm going to be talking about today, the challenges of tariffs and their impact, the challenges with labor, and then also government debt and the impacts of artificial intelligence are all the same that you guys are talking about in your economic forecast. I was so excited, I said, you know, maybe I should just cede the floor and I don't have to do my talk at all. But Rob said that he wouldn't give me breakfast if I didn't do the talk, so here, I'll come up and deliver it. I thought that was much funnier than anybody in this room, but okay. Economic experimentation. So we use this term because we are thinking about the significant policy changes that are coming from the White House. Without really weighing in on whether things are good, bad, or indifferent, our clients do not pay us for that. Our job is to judge the impact on the economy and ultimately the impact on their portfolios. And we also point out that this is not a first. Basically, economies are constantly going through some kind of experiment, some kind of dramatic change, whether it's the creation of the World Trade Organization, admitting China in 2001, 2002, Bretton Woods. I mean, you go back through history, and we are always in a time of dynamism. It just happens to be that we're in significant dynamism and changes in experimentation right now. So our forecast is split into the three themes of the reshoring experiment. We had that titled the tariff experiment at first, but it's not really about tariffs. It's about the attempt to reshore manufacturing jobs and manufacturing activity to the United States. Also, the labor experiment in terms of cutting back on immigration. The U.S. has for its history, relied on immigration as an important source of labor. And that is changing fairly significantly right now, and it will have ramifications. And then lastly, the debt experiment, because the United States is running and projected to run 7 to 8% of GDP deficits in a time of economic expansion, which is mostly unprecedented and can also have some impacts. And uniquely, in my 25 years of being an economist and doing presentations like this, I have something positive to say about the debt and the outlook going ahead. So we will get to that. In terms of the 9 to 12 months ahead, we have a lot of reasons for optimism, including the recent strong GDP numbers. I'm a little bit leery of some of those. GDP is a little bit fishy sometimes with the way that the numbers show up, and it can also turn fairly quickly. but there are a lot of things that are supporting the economy, like the fiscal stimulus that was passed last year. We're expecting the Federal Reserve to keep reducing interest rates, and as I'll touch on, we're expecting productivity boost from artificial intelligence. We also have some reasons for caution. Chief among them is the current state of the labor market, and it has to do with that labor availability that you, as a group, pointed out in your economic forecast for the year, but then also the cyclical impacts of tariffs. We also have some challenges with housing affordability and some other items as well. Now, I get accused sometimes of being the dismal scientist, even among a group of dismal scientists within the Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal consensus forecast, which means not a consensus at all. It's all the economists submitting their forecast to those organizations. When you read about the consensus, it's just the median, it's the middle forecast. But I get accused sometimes of being on the pessimistic side of things. We're expecting just 1% GDP growth this year. Now, that is well below, or half of what the current median forecast is coming from the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg consensus survey, right around 2%, and they're starting to raise it a little bit. But it's not really pessimism in the sense that we think that there's something wrong with the economy. We just think that there is an adjustment period going on, still emanating from tariffs, while as I watch all of the interviews in Davos and watch people come on Bloomberg and CNBC are talking about how tariffs was a 2025 thing, I think it's still a 2026 thing. The companies are still struggling with that change in the cost of their goods and rerouting supply chains. The labor market, we're expecting the unemployment rate to rise, but not to skyrocket. But on the positive side, we do expect inflation to slow down and, as I said, the Fed to continue cutting interest rates. The first theme, as I said, the reshoring experiment. We think that the effort to reshore very well could and is reshoring manufacturing activity in some sense, but not so much jobs. As we point out in the full report, the U.S. has some of the highest labor costs in the world, especially for the manufacturing sector. So it's very challenging to entice or to coax companies with the use of tariffs to bring manufacturing activity back to the U.S. The detailed example that we go through in the forecast is for shoes on the left-hand side and semiconductors on the right-hand side. For anything that, there's going to be a test later, there's a lot of colors there, there's a legend and everything. The main takeaway here is that the white areas are the labor cost. So on the left-hand side, shoes, this is comparing manufacturing shoes in Vietnam, where the labor costs are quite small, versus in the United States, where they would be quite large. And that operation still does require some hand stitching and a lot of labor costs. And essentially, the story here is just shown in the orange area, where you would basically need to more than double the tariff to equate the costs of production. Otherwise, people in industries that use a significant amount of labor are going to say, no, we'll just pay the tariff if it's 20%, if it's 30%. On the other side, the semiconductors on the right-hand side is more of an automated process. You can barely see the white area in terms of the total cost of producing something that's on the higher tech end of things. The tariffs that would be required to entice manufacturing back to reshoring and back to the United States are much smaller, much less significant. And we use this as an example, but also recognize it's not just tariffs. The United States has advantages, including infrastructure, include the rule of law, and a lot of access to the materials. And of course, as we know with Micron and with other efforts, you don't need to just attack it from the tariff side. You can also, with subsidies in the CHIPS Act and whatnot, you can basically eliminate some of the dark blue area. So the takeaway is that we think that tariffs are here to stay. They will bring back some manufacturing activity to the U.S. in this reshoring experiment, but not entirely. We're not going to bring everything back that had moved overseas. In terms of the ongoing impact of tariffs, this is one of the things where we expect there to still be some challenges this year. The left-hand side is showing the effective tariff rate. So how much are we collecting in tariff revenues divided by how much we import. not everything gets the same tariff rate, right? There's like 13,000 line items in the HTS database. So this is just the overall, at the end of the day, effective tariff rate, which went from 2.5% when I stood up here 1 year ago to 12% now. That's as we point out in our report, that's one of the most significant tax hikes in U.S. history, excluding wartime. Now, we also have tax cuts for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So there's some mitigating impacts there, but of course, those things are not interchangeable depending on how a business's costs are structured. The 12% effective tariff rate that we're experiencing now is far below what had been feared and calculated at first on April 2nd, the Rose Garden announcement, because we had a lot of delays. We've had trade deals, and there's also been a lot of rerouting of trade away from the higher tariff areas. Over the weekend, China published that it had the highest exports in its history. However, exports to the United States have completely plummeted. That's not entirely because they found all new customers. It's because some of the trade is being rerouted, and we end up paying a lower tariff for it. The important takeaway when we go to a macro sense, and especially inflation on the right-hand side, is exactly what we had been thinking a year ago, which is that it has driven up the price of goods. That is the line on the bottom that has the yellow shaded region. But we never really thought it was going to affect overall inflation that much and drive inflation higher. The tariffs really started to come in several weeks after I spoke here last year. And we were a little bit on our own in saying, no, we don't think that it's really going to drive overall inflation, because you can only really push through price increases on consumers if they have the wherewithal and the willingness to pay for those tariff increases. And with the slowdown in job growth, slowdown in wage growth, essentially what has happened is what we thought, which is if consumers are faced with higher prices because of tariffs on imported goods, they're going to spend less on other things, such as services. Movie theater tickets, entertainment, travel, haircuts, what have you. That's the gray line on the top. And when you bring together the goods and services, you get that dark blue line, which is the continued deceleration of inflation, which is, and frankly, good news, because that has enabled the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates at the last 3 meetings of 2025. The reshoring of manufacturing is going to advantage some industries more than others, and the ones that will be able to take advantage of it are those that are more capital intensive, that can handle the CapEx, such as at the top of the list there, automotive, electronics, pharmaceuticals. These are the industries that have the access to capital, the ability to increase the efficiency of their production processes, and to take advantage of increased automation, and especially artificial intelligence. Increased automation for manufacturing is a feature of the U.S. economy and a feature of the sector that has been around for a long time. For example, automotive sector has all kinds of cameras and sensors and whatnot, and can speed up their production processes looking for defects, whether it's paint jobs or bolts that aren't in quite tight enough, or wirings and things like that. The impact of artificial intelligence can be massive, both because it can monitor defects in the production process, and also as we develop more high-tech and capable AI, you get to agentic AI, an agent that can actually make changes to the production process and keep things going and reduce downtime. Estimates of reduced downtime are as high as 20%. You can reduce the amount of downtime by 20%, which obviously has an impact on costs. So we have on the right-hand side some of the investment opportunities and the impacts that we expect and we present to our clients. For the labor market and the labor experiment, we are facing a slowdown of population growth in this country. That's been going on for a long time. The teal area is the net natural increase, so just pure births minus deaths. The chart starts in 2005. The shaded region is the forecast coming from the Congressional Budget Office, and it shows that we will start to have a declining domestic population starting in 2030 or 2031 because of low birth rates, and those are lower. They're not enough in terms of replacement rates to exceed the deaths, so that decline in population. I always say that I did my part. I had 4 kids. I'm fighting against that decline in the teal area, but not everybody is doing that. So the swing variable here is that choice variable from each successive administration. The dark area is immigration. And this administration has decided to cut back significantly on immigration, both legal and illegal. And again, not here to weigh in on the merits of whether it's good, bad, or indifferent policy, only on the impacts. The Congressional Budget Office's most recent forecast, this is in percentage terms, but that's about 900,000 people per year, net immigration for the duration of this forecast, keeps our population growth positive out past 2050. But they could be wrong about that. That is a choice. That is an experiment. If we reduce our immigration to the point that it is not adding to population, then we will have a declining population and a declining labor force at some point. Labor force is a little more complicated, who chooses to work, the ages and whatnot, but we will have declining population and labor force. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. This happened to Japan 30 years ago. They are famously resistant to immigration, and they've had very low GDP growth. And that's because GDP growth essentially comes from two things. It comes from the growth in your labor force, growth rate, and growth in productivity. So if we make the choice and do the experiment of cutting back on immigration, then we are going to be relying significantly on productivity, efficiency, some of the things that you note in your forecast that need to be more productive because of the challenge of finding qualified workers. The good news here is that we are very bullish on productivity and the prospects of artificial intelligence boosting that productivity. I apologize, as I have every year, for the somewhat chaotic looking chart. I had somebody tell me yesterday this looked like their EKG as they've been watching the news about NATO and Greenland over the past, Greenland, over the past couple of years. This is productivity growth in the United States, starting in 1990 and on through a little bit of a forecast. A couple of things to note here. The most recent productivity numbers we are at, and this is an eight quarter, so a 2-year annualized growth rate. The most recent data, we have productivity growth of greater than 2%, really greater than at any period between the global financial crisis and COVID. Very strong productivity growth because of the actions that businesses took in the wake of COVID. Now, there's a couple lines there, CBO baseline, CBO higher. Those are the CBO's forecasts and their expectations for productivity growth. I will come back to those. But I'll note a couple of other things. That orange area is the expected boost that we see from artificial intelligence and the incorporation of new technologies. That's pretty positive, and it's actually not even as positive as the boom that we got from the growth of the internet in the late 1990s. It does take a long time. AI is new. Incorporating it and figuring out how to do it, again, as you said in your forecast and in the report, is a very challenging thing, and it's going to take years. But I think the more important takeaway is it will have a long runway after that, multiple years, a decade, similar to what we experienced from the boost of the internet. There are lots of investment opportunities as it comes from the spread of AI. Quick stock tip, have you heard of NVIDIA? Yes. For 2 years you have, of course. That is not an actual stock tip. I'm not actually licensed to give stock tips, but it's a joke because these are essentially the picks and shovels, right? The people did not make a whole lot of money in the gold rush, but the people who sold the picks and the shovels for the gold rush were the ones who really made out well, and that's what NVIDIA is. After that, you have to look past the picks and the shovels. We see a lot of opportunities for investment in the hyperscalers that are building up the large artificial intelligence models. Currently, we know that there's a lot of opportunity with the data centers, the energy providers, and the utility. And what we think is the most opportunistic investments are going to come from those who are developing the software, the smaller AI models, the ones that plug into your production processes, your business processes, and there are some really good investment opportunities there. And then the hardest ones to peg are the adopters, because ultimately we will all be adopters, right? In the year 2000, not everybody had the internet. We all have it now, and we use it constantly. Our third theme is about debt and deficits. This is showing debt as deficits as a share of GDP. The United States is the orange line. We are projected to have those steep deficits around 8% of GDP going forward. This is a challenge, and the other lines are other developed countries. It is a challenge because it starts to really drive up longer-term interest rates. So this is a little bit nuanced when you get into the financial markets, but this is the comparison of our 10-year yield. How much is the U.S. government going to pay you to lend to them for 10 years versus the 30-year yield. And when you start to see separations like we have over the past year or back during COVID, as those start to rise, that is a signal that investors are getting a little bit more worried about the creditworthiness of the United States from the 11th year to the 30th year of the tenure of these bonds. So it is not necessarily driving concerns in the here and now about the U.S.'s ability to pay its bills, but sort of driving up that risk premium as you get further out on the curve if we don't do something about our debt and deficits. I told you I would bring this one back, and it's incredibly important because the forecasters of our debt last year, as we were passing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you would get very scary charts about what's going to happen to our long-term debt, which I'm going to bring up after this slide. But I bring you back to the two lines on the right-hand side, both the dashed line, which is the Congressional Budget Office's assumed productivity growth, 0.9% going forward, and they run a scenario, what if productivity growth was 0.5% higher, 1.4%? Those play through to their debt projections. The dotted line is the scary runaway debt that we are expecting from right now, where debt to GDP is 100%. Our debt is about the same as our nominal GDP, which rises to 160% of GDP by the year 2055, 30 years out. That is scary. That is a problem. This is what generates the discussions about the challenges of our debt and deficits. And I said at the beginning, I was going to have some good news for you about the debt. That is because if you have productivity growth, according to the CBO, just a little bit higher, the 1.4% teal line, then we don't have that much of a debt problem. That's the bottom teal line. If you have higher productivity growth, then your debt to GDP just kind of plateaus. I don't even have it on here, but if we get the kind of boost from AI and productivity that we are expecting, which frankly I think is a little bit on the modest side, 2 to 5% productivity growth as this technology emanates and gets distributed and permeates our economy, this is actually going to go down. I would have to change the scale and have a negative line where we would be paying down our debt. This would be great news, and it would also be a repeat of what happened in the late 1990s. In 1995, if you sat and talked about the debt projections, it would be a very scary conversation. Nobody thought that we were going to be paying back debt. But 3, 4, 5 years later, as you got back into the late 1990s, as we had that strong productivity growth, our receipts exceeded the expenditure and we were paying down debt. Absolutely inconceivable as of 1995 in some of the same ways that the debt conversation could be very negative right now. So when we bring it all together, we really think that we are in the early innings of artificial intelligence, and as it permeates the economy, it is the thing that can help us deal with a challenging experiment with tariffs, with low labor force growth, and then also with our debt problems. We do have some concerns about the high valuations of some of the Mag 7 and some of these technology-driven companies. But in the investment sense, we really think that we're going to start to get some narrowing of that. The other 493 companies in the S&P 500 and then also small cap stocks are going to start to do much better than they have in the past relative to those Mag 7 stocks, so-called Mag 7 stocks. So in an investment sense, as the AI permeates the economy and has positive impacts, we think it will affect markets as well. As always, we communicate to our clients our investment advice on a 9 to 12 month ahead basis. And right now we are cautiously optimistic. I won't go through sort of like the details of all this, but it's essentially our investment advice on whether you think you should be overweight or underweight equities. We are kind of right down the middle of the road because, as I said at the beginning, we're expecting kind of low GDP growth this year, but not terrible, as the economy and all of you and across the country are dealing with some of these challenges and some of these experiments. But we have a lot of faith in the ability of U.S. firms to adapt, because we are the most dynamic country in the world, and our ability to handle those experiments, ultimately incorporating new technologies and improving our production processes. So if nothing else, please give Rob the signal that I have earned my breakfast, and I will turn it back over to your organizers. Thank you all very much.